Hi, welcome to Highland Cottage Books. I'm Martha, and this is Highland Cottage, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 thrillers that are being released in January 2026. They are clever, they are twisty, and they are sure to keep you guessing. I made you some coffee and some tea, so grab yourself a mug, have a seat on the couch, and let's talk books. First, let me say that I was lucky enough to receive advance review copies of all 5 of these books from the publishers, but these are my honest opinions. To that end, I received 6 more thrillers that I am not recommending today. Also, I would really appreciate it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps me and the channel, which is just starting to grow. So without further ado, let's jump into The Storm by Rachel Hawkins. In the 1980s, scandal rocked an Alabama coastal town when the governor's son was found dead after a hurricane. In some ways, his death looked suspicious, and it soon came to light that the 30-year-old married lawyer was having an affair with a 19-year-old local, and she stood trial for the crime. It was a tabloid sensation, and while she was acquitted, suspicion has hung over her for decades. Now she's back in town and working with a ghostwriter to write her side of the story. The story is told primarily from 2 points of view. First, we have Lo, who is the former teenager who is explaining how she felt about what was going on, and she's talking about what it was like to be in the town and what it was like to date this older man who was much richer than she was. Her family didn't have any money, and at the time, all she was recognized to have was her beauty. And we're also hearing from the owner of the Rosalie Inn, which is where Lo and the writer are staying, which is a bit of a ghoulish choice given that that is where Landon, the lawyer, was found. I really enjoyed the central mystery of this book and also the slow unfurling of the secrets that are happening in this town. But I particularly love Lo. She is a very colorful woman. She is still very beautiful. She is described as just being an incredible presence, and you can absolutely see her magnetism. It comes across on the page. I also enjoyed cheering on Geneva, who is struggling with her inn and just trying to keep it afloat. This book would be perfect to take with you on a weekend beach getaway. In The Castaways by Lucy Clarke, 2 sisters are excited for a trip to Fiji, but it doesn't go as planned. They make it to a hotel in the main island just fine, but the next morning only one of them is on the very small plane that is headed to their luxury hotel. And very soon after that flight takes off, it disappears completely. In the 2 years since the disappearance, the younger sister, Erin, has been obsessing over finding out what happened to her big sister and the plane that she was on. Suddenly, some new evidence comes to light, and she races to Fiji to go figure out what happened. This is a dual timeline story. We get the current present-day investigation, and we also get to hear from Lori, who is the person who was on that plane, and we find out that she did crash on a deserted island with a small group of other people. And the most exciting parts of this book are finding out what happened to the plane, how it crashed, where the island is, what is going on with the survivors, and where are they now, if they are anywhere. I do have to tell you that while I enjoyed reading this book, I simply flew through it. I put it down at the end and I felt a little disappointed. But the next morning I woke up and went, no, I really like that book. And the more and more I think about it, the more and more I enjoyed it. And my initial disappointment was kind of this thing that was happening in my own head, because partially some of the things that I had read about the book, they were saying, oh, it's like Lost, or it's I actually can't remember the other thing, but it got me into thinking that maybe there was some grand conspiracies, or maybe even some cosmic horror, or smoke monsters and polar bears. Who knows? I don't know what I had in my head, but I was kind of waiting for huge shoes to drop, as it were. When in reality, it is a very taut and well told story that is much smaller in scale and absolutely works on its own merits. It fundamentally is the story between these two sisters and their relationship and their own feelings. They were orphaned when the younger one was a teenager and the older one was just a very young adult. And so she absolutely took on the role of parent to her little sister, even though she was very young herself, and kind of some of the intense love and the intense bond there, but also a little bit of resentment, perhaps, as well. And we also hear about the older sister as she struggles with this small group of very mismatched castaways on the island, and what happens when they start to get hungry and they start to get cold and they start to be bitten by bugs a lot, and the veneer of civility starts to fall away. So it is a very good book, but don't believe them when they say it's like Lost, because it's only like Lost in that, oh look, there's a bunch of strangers who are stuck on an island. It's not like Lost in that there are layers within layers of grand conspiracy or speculative fiction or anything like that. It's very reality based. But that's not to say it isn't dramatic. It certainly is. And speaking of drama, there is Andrea Mara's It Should Have Been You, and I am so excited that it is coming out this month. I read it almost a year ago in preparation for what I thought was its release date. But it turns out it was released in the UK and Ireland much earlier than its North American release. But yay, now everybody can read it. So the premise itself is very simple and should strike terror in the hearts of any modern day person. A sleep-deprived new mom whips off a snarky text full of juicy, nasty gossip to her sister in a fit of pique, and then runs to take a shower. When she checks her phone later, she discovers, much to her horror, that she didn't send that text to her sister. She sent it to the entire neighborhood WhatsApp group, including the subject of all that gossip. And right there, we have one of the scariest stories of 2026. However, it gets worse, because the next day, a woman who has our protagonist's exact same name and a very similar address. I believe she lives right outside of Dublin. Think one person lives on Elm Street and the other person lives on Elm Avenue. Anyway, the woman who seems to be her kind of name and address doppelganger ends up dead, and it appears like she was murdered. And soon our unfortunate heroine gets an anonymous note that says, "It should have been you." This book is suspenseful and full of all the neighborhood drama. I read it in about 3 seconds flat because, oh my God, what happens next? What happens next? When I Kill You is the first book by B.A. Paris that I read, but it won't be the last. We're following a woman named Nell who has a secret past. She's changed her name and has spent years holding herself apart from the people that she used to know and refusing to get close to new people because she doesn't want anybody to figure out that she is a little bit infamous. However, recently she has been feeling lonely and has decided to start venturing into a few more casual relationships, and has even struck up a sort of long-distance romantic relationship too. Unfortunately, she can't shake the feeling like she is being followed, and oh boy, is she being followed. Intercut with the main action of the story, we get little snatches from a completely unhinged diary from her stalker, which like kind of lists how the stalker feels about Nell and what the stalker admires and dislikes about Nell. And every entry ends with "when I kill you," as in kind of crazy phrases like we both like Earl Grey tea, but that won't matter when I kill you. I'm smiling because at times it's a little bit silly, and I think it's meant at times to be a little over the top. For me, the present day drama takes a back seat to what we discover that Nell did when she was younger. I can't really say what happened in the past without being too vague about it because of spoilers, but I will say that it deals with all sorts of interesting themes involving obsession and responsibility and desperation. Nell really goes through it in this book, and what's interesting about it is that she is not a perfect victim, but even so, she is a victim. And while the modern day kind of mystery suspense situation is much more kind of silly and popcorny, and well, I'll leave it there. But the thing that happens in the past and its ramifications for the present are tragic. This book isn't my favorite on this short list. There's some tonal stuff and some pacing stuff that didn't work for me. But the stuff that happens in the past and the way that that's dealt with made me want to forgive, certainly, the parts that I didn't love as much, and I do think it is absolutely worth your time. And finally, my favorite book on this list, My Husband's Wife by Alice Feeney. This is a book where it's best to go in as blind as humanly possible outside of the initial premise, but it is so complex, not hard to read and not hard to understand, but it's the relationships and the situation of what's going on is so Byzantine that I could not summarize it for you or spoil it for you if I tried. So Eden Fox is an artist who is right on the cusp of a new chapter of her life. She and her husband have moved to Hope Falls, which is a town in Cornwall, England, and they've only been there a very short time. She's been fixing up the house that they live in. The house is called Spyglass because of its unusual windows. And she is very excited because she's going to have her first show is going to open that night. But to clear her head, she has a little alone time and she does what she likes to do, which is go for a run. So she's running and she's kind of thinking over her plans for the evening and what she's going to wear and how excited she is that people are finally going to be able to see her art, when she gets home and puts her key in the lock and it doesn't fit. So she's like, that's weird. Okay. So she knocks on the door, waiting for her husband to answer, but instead of her husband, another woman answers. And she looks like her, but this woman looks very much like Eden, but a little bit older. And she says, who are you? And that woman says, I live here. And Eden's very confused. And then Eden's husband comes behind that lady and says, honey, who's this? In reference to Eden. And unfortunately, I can't tell you anything else, but I can say that this book kept getting deeper and deeper, and the connections kept getting more and more complex, and the twists got more and more impressive. And I say impressive because sometimes authors throw twist after twist after twist at you, and while they're shocking in the moment, they don't really make much sense. In this case, I feel like all the twists, while big, are earned. Now, I am a big fan of Alice Feeney, And I would give this book an enthusiastic 4.5, which would put it on level with Rock, Paper, Scissors, and I would say just a little bit below Beautiful Ugly, which for me right now is the pinnacle. But for me, 4.5 is very high praise. And if you're going to pick up any of these books and you're not sure, this is the one. It's absolutely wild. So that's it. 5 thriller books that are releasing in January, and they're coming to steal your sleep. Thank you so much for staying with me. Please consider subscribing. It really helps me and the channel. And I hope you have an excellent day. Bye!